Hey guys, welcome to the From Corner to Corner podcast. We are live from the Backroom Studios, and we're with a special guest tonight. We are with the young professor. How you doing this evening?
Fellas, I'm doing very well. How are you guys doing this evening?
We're doing fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And, we're really pumped about getting these YouTube interviews going, and we're excited to have you on as our first YouTube guest.
I'm not sure if you made the right decision with my mug being the first one you try to float out.
Oh, no,
there.
I definitely,
but the ratings can't go down. So, I mean, I guess
Right.
there's that. So.
And you're a Roosevelt guy. So,
yes, if nothing else, this will save us. All behind
this will save us.
I mean, all this free advertisement that the Roosevelts are getting right now. I mean, we're going to tag them and say, hey, you guys need to pay us up.
Yeah, right. I actually had those guys out. I met Steven. I met the guys from HQ this summer. I guess we can get into that later. We can talk about it now, but I hosted an unofficial meetup that turned into pseudo official meetup at the Daytona Tortugas Stadium here in Daytona Beach, Florida. And they all came down. And the one thing I will tell you, those guys can party.
Nice. So you talked to that. That'll lead to our first question. You talked about the Daytona Tortugas. Tell us what you do there.
So I guess, obviously this is a pro wrestling podcast.
Right.
I don't know when this is airing, but as of the date of this recording, tomorrow is my 4-year WrestleVersary, if you will.
Nice.
The first time I ever stepped in front of a live audience at a professional wrestling show and performed. And here we are 4 years later. And it started in a very small way, and it has blossomed into a whole lot more since then. I consider myself a professional host. Ring announcer is usually the role that I assume in professional wrestling. I also do commentary, usually as a play-by-play commentator. I've also been a manager too, so I've gotten a chance to do a few things in the last 4 years. But I also, from there, sprung off and started hosting games in arena football. For 2 seasons, I was with the Jacksonville Sharks arena football team. And then now I work with the minor league baseball team, the Daytona Tortugas, a minor league affiliate of the Cincinnati Reds.
Nice.
I've worked in pro boxing, pro paintball, pro and amateur MMA. They bring me out to announce artists for art battles. I live a pretty cool life. I do a lot of really interesting things. And it all comes from wrestling. Wrestling's where it started.
You are living like one of my dreams, right? I wanted so badly when I was a kid to be the next Dick Vitale, the guy on the TV that you saw. I mean, I would absolutely love doing what you're doing. I mean, Cincinnati's only about 2 hours from us, the Reds. So
I'm trying to get up there, man. I've always wanted to go to the Great American Ballpark. It looks like a really beautiful spot, a beautiful facility. And there's a lot of major league parks I haven't been to. I've been to quite a few. But that's always been one on my list, and I've got a better excuse than ever nowadays. Hopefully I can make a big enough splash. Maybe I'll get invited. There was something we did this past season that actually got us on their broadcast,
Nice.
which was pretty cool. But next step, we got places to go, hopefully.
Right.
that's awesome. That's fantastic.
All right. So let's start with the wrestling talk. What made you a fan of pro wrestling?
For as much as I just dropped all the sports and stuff I'm in, I didn't grow up a big sports fan. It wasn't something that was really big in my house. So I really wasn't beholden to any of it. And I'm 35. I'm not as young as I was when I started all this. So I'm right at the age of when I was like 11, 12 years old. When I was 11, it was 97. So let's do a little wrestling math here.
Right.
That's the Attitude Era. That's the Monday Night Wars. That's when it kind of reached its apex as, kids like me and my age were also coming of age. And it was, between wrestling and South Park in 97, that was pop culture, right?
Yeah.
And that was when I got cable TV too. So it was something to watch. And I had a friend that I used to hang out with, grew up with, and he got into wrestling first, and then I got cable, and I wanted to know what he was talking about. He talked a lot about The Undertaker and Paul Bearer, and he used to tell me all the stories about basically the storylines of what was going on TV. But when you have no context for wrestling, and people it sounded like a wild, insane story, and I was very drawn to it. And then I got to see it and watch it and loved it. So that's when I picked it up and sunk my teeth into it. And I've been riding with it pretty much ever since. I didn't give it up. I stopped watching a little bit as I was in like late high school. I was working, I was in activities. I didn't really have a girlfriend, all that stuff when you're that age. So I kind of fell off, and that was when the WCW invasion happened. That's when it kind of started
Right.
going that direction anyway. But when I got to college and my nights were free again, I kind of came back to it, and that was 04, 05, and I've been watching and following pretty closely ever since.
You were coming right back into the ruthless aggression era around that time. John Cena was getting ready to hit the scene, and you had Triple H.
He was literally hitting as I came back to it. Like I skipped like the whole beginning of that. I missed like Brock's entire run almost.
Yeah,
which is interesting because I used to still follow the dirt sheets and follow the results because I never like stopped paying attention to it. But I remember I worked at a grocery store, and a guy used to tell me I looked like a really skinny young Brock Lesnar. Now I just look like his fat, out of shape younger brother, I guess. But
oh, that's great. That's
but,
great. Well,
but yeah, a little bit of ruthless aggression heading into the PG era was when I kind of came back.
Yeah. Well, and Brock wasn't around very long anyways at that time. So he had different grander ideas at that time. Of course, now he's back, and he's
right.
as big now as he ever was.
Right,
so
right.
I've
awesome.
always loved him, man. He is one of my favorite. Like, I get it. I know people don't like how they use him. I'm like, that's the guy. Like, he's a draw, period. Like, that's what he's so legitimate. Like, in a pinch, you need a champ. That's your guy. And who's going to argue with him? Like, he can destroy anybody.
I tell people that all the time. I'm like, people will hate on him, and I'm like, listen, you don't understand. He's money. Brock Lesnar, and especially if you get Brock with an opponent that he wants to work with, there's not many people better.
Yeah.
No, he's had so many great matches with guys. I mean, he's so good, and people don't realize how iconic he is. I made a comment to somebody the other day. I stopped in on Saturday night. NWA was running in Jacksonville with Elijah Burke. Pope is a friend of mine, and he asked me to host that show months ago, and I was booked for something else, so I couldn't. But when I got done, I raced 100 miles up and caught the end of it and helped tear down and everything. But we had an entranceway, and we had kind of almost like those steel like girders looking. And as soon as I'm watching all these wrestlers, as soon as everybody picks them up, what do they start doing with them?
Big curling.
And everybody's talking about Brock, and I sat and I thought about that for a minute. I was like, that was a non-vocal promo, right? It was just like a clip. But it's so iconic that as soon as you see it, like, you think of Brock and you just think of him curling because they look so big and heavy, and it was so impressive. The guy was money when he was like 22 years old. Right. He's still money today at 42 years old.
Right.
Well, we talk about Brock a lot on the show.
Yeah.
And the one thing that we always say, like you said, if he wants to work with someone, it's going to be a great match. If he doesn't, it's not going to be a great match. And I mean, it's
there have
pretty
been
obvious.
Some stinkers. Yeah, for sure. I think of his match with Moxley a few years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Was
horrible.
It was nothing. Like, it was just terrible. It was a squash. It was, there have been a few of those, but you're right. When he wants to have a good match, his match with Daniel Bryan a few years ago.
I was thinking the exact same thing. Yep.
The guys he looks like he'd eat for breakfast, but he had incredible matches with. So the guy's a hell of a performer.
Yes.
Yep. You're right. So what got you into wrestling? I mean, I know you didn't follow the route of being a wrestler, or did you?
So you mean getting into the business, essentially?
Getting into the business, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have, my voice is kind of my talent, I suppose. And it's something that for really since I was in high school, people kind of were always like, hey, man, you sound really good. You should do this. You should do that. And I'd heard it for years and years and years. And about a year or so before I started in wrestling, I started as a trivia host. So I started in entertainment. I was doing nightly bar trivia. I'm sure you guys have things like that out there by you. There, stuff like that is everywhere. But the company that I worked for, I started working with them, and for about a year, I guess a year and a half, I was working that, getting in front of a crowd, and all the time people would say, gosh, you sound really good on a microphone. Do you work for this sports team? Do you work for the Tortugas, or they were the Daytona Cubs at the time? Do you do that? And I was always like, no. And finally I just went, enough people tell you something, right. Maybe you should kind of start looking into it. So I took an interest in it. I never had any formal training. I never had any formal education in it. I went to school. My bachelor's degree is in psychology. My master's degree was in kinesiology, and so in exercise science. And I had been teaching for years. I was an actual young professor at the time. I'm coming up on 10 years since I started doing that. So I was 25 years old teaching college. And a pro wrestling company that was based out of Daytona Beach posted that they were looking for an announcer, and I reached out. I sent them a video they asked for, and they said, come on down. And that was 4 years ago tomorrow. And actually it's funny because yesterday a post came up on my Facebook from 4 years ago, and I said, I guess I'll add pro wrestling announcer to my resume.
Nice.
And a couple of people laughed, like there's a few laugh emojis, and a few people were like, that's so cool. And I wrote, and I even posted it off my young professor social media yesterday because I thought it was really a powerful thing. Somebody was like, well, what is it? What fed? And I was like, it's a local fed, and they're looking for somebody. And I reached out, and I just decided I need to give this a try now. I've been really trying to make some efforts to make more out of my life, to go after things I've always wanted to do. And if I don't try this now, while I'm still young enough to call myself a young professor, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. That's literally what I wrote. And I saw it yesterday, and I just kind of had one of those moments where you sit back and you think of everything you've been able to do. And it really was incredible. Like, it was a life-changing thing for me. And I never would have predicted it. I never would have thought that it would have led to anything. They might have told me, you suck, get out, don't come back. And that would have been the end of it. And instead I've worked, between all the sports, hundreds and hundreds of shows since then. I mean, I've hosted, between that and trivia, I've hosted over 1,000 events in the last 6 years. I've worked with huge names. I've worked with remarkable up-and-comers. I've been blessed to do it all. And it all started with just keeping an ear to the ground and looking for opportunity and jumping at it, and then staying with it ever since.
Well, that's kind of what we're trying to do with this podcast. Right. I mean, I think a lot of people thought when we got started with this, that's not going to last. Right. We're 52 episodes in. We're 6 months into this. We're obviously evolving into the YouTube world. We've got a couple of other great ideas that we're thinking about doing, but it's a dream that we have, and we're going to give it everything that it has. And, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. We get that. And not every podcaster turns into Joe Rogan and makes $30 million a month.
Right.
And that's not what our goal is. Our goal is to put a good quality product out. And, to hear your story, it's super, it gives me the goosies, right? Right. We always talk about the goosies, and I think it's awesome that you've been able to do what you want to do, a dream that you didn't even know you had, but it was a talent. And that's the thing with talent. You never know it's there until it just kind of shows up sometimes. And I think that's what's so fantastic about it. So that's great, man.
You just got to find what you're good at. And I think that's more of a life lesson than a wrestling podcast content or anything.
Right. Yeah.
I think once you kind of find out where your strength is, I'm not, like, something breaks around here, I'm as useful as a third shoe. Like, I'm not your guy. Like, that's not what I'm good at. The car breaks down. I'm not the best person to have with you. I could make a phone call. I'm good at that. Right. I maybe I could talk the price down somewhere or something along those lines and speak authoritatively, but I've kind of learned where to apply my creative energies and where my talent is. And it's sometimes you just got to pay attention too, because I think everyone has something, right? Something that they're good at, something that they're just naturally suited for. And like, if people or the universe, however you want to word it, look at it, are telling you something, you need to listen to that, and you need to open your ears and open your mind, and then start finding the ways to apply it. I mean, that's the root of my whole story. Is people have been telling me that since I was a teenager. And it took me till I was about 30 to finally go, yeah, let's go ahead and do something with it. And, the calling probably was there sooner, but I probably just wasn't ready for that lesson. But thankfully, it wasn't too late.
Well, Neil is full, and I mean full of wrestling knowledge. I mean, like, he knows things that I've never heard of before. He names wrestlers that I've never heard of before. It's just like it's been ingrained in him since he was a kid. And that makes our shows really interesting. A lot of people like listening to our shows because the banter that we have back and forth between each other, because, I mean, we're best friends. I mean, we really are. We talk to each other every day. We spend a lot of time with each other. And I get to do kind of what I wanted to do, right? I say I drive the bus. I'm the host, and then he's like the color. But that works really well. And we were in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, at the WrestleCade when you all connected on Facebook.
Yes.
And we went to WrestleCade in 2019. It was the first time that we got to go. And then, of course, they didn't have it COVID year. And then it was back this year. And I mean, we couldn't wait to go back. And we have discovered a love for independent wrestling that we didn't know that we had. And I mean, we've got guys that are going to be coming on that we've seen wrestle down there in WrestleCade a couple of times in the next few days, actually. And we've got some Ring of Honor guys, some OVW guys that are going to be coming on the show. And like, going to WrestleCade, making that contact with you gave us the confidence to go, well, the only thing they can do is say no. And nobody has said no. Now, we've had people ignore us.
Right. Yeah, you get that too. Yeah, sure.
But I mean, we've had almost everybody has said, I would love to do that, because we want to know their story, right? I mean, we don't want to talk all about our story. You don't care about that as much. We want our fans to hear about you guys because of our love for wrestling. But the cool part about that is being able to learn about a side of the business that we don't know about.
Right.
We know what's on TV. We know how to watch the guys wrestle in the ring, but we don't know all of that stuff. So that's what makes this so cool, is to being able to get to talk to these guys. And like, I don't know if you know who the Infinite Man is, Timmy Lou Retton.
Yeah.
So
love
we're
him.
interviewing him on Thursday.
Performer. Yeah, and you're going to have a great interview with him because Tim's a great guy. I worked with him for the first time a couple of years ago when he was still in a tag team. They split up and went their separate ways, and he's kind of like completely reinvented himself in the last year. Guy lost a ton of weight. In unbelievable shape. He connects with the audience in ways that I think very few do on the independents. I mean, and every time he's in the ring, he has an absolute banger of a match. I mean, I've gotten to work with him a bunch of times in Florida and Georgia, and the guy doesn't have a bad match ever at all. And
he didn't before he did the change.
Yeah, he had a match at River City Wrestling Con, which I've been blessed to host the only two times we've had it. And it's kind of like WrestleCade. It's not quite that scale, but it's still brand new too. But we have like those huge names, and we have those really big guests. Like I got to interview Kane for about 40 minutes inside of a ring in front of a few thousand people that are there. I got to introduce Mark Henry. I got to introduce Kurt Angle and Mick Foley, and I got to sit down with the Steiner brothers. And Tim and Mr. Grimm had a match. I don't know if you guys know Mr. Grimm. He's based out of like the Baltimore area, and they tore the place down. They had an unbelievable, because they're two big guys that can move in ways that defy gravity and physics, and just an unbelievable match. And I know Mark Henry and Ron Simmons were both watching, and I've seen a few things happen for them since then because people were stopping what they were doing to watch this match. Tim is that good, and you guys are going to have a blast talking to him.
He's supposed to be on AEW Dark tonight.
Yeah, I saw that he's got a match coming up.
Yeah, so that was pretty exciting. I mean, we kind of fell in love. I think they were the Gym Nasty Boys.
The Gym Nasty Boys, and I love them as a tag team.
Yeah.
I get the feeling. I don't know. I get the feeling that it's a sore subject. I don't know how much he talks about it, but I think he did a lot of great work with that tag team, and what he's doing now as a singles competitor, while entirely different. The guy is a stud, an absolute stud. I mean, I can give you a couple matches that I would recommend you go watch before you talk to him, and you'll see, just unbelievable.
Right. Yeah. So that leads me to my next segue. Tell us where you're currently working. What promotions do you work with the most? And then to follow up with that, where would the young professor like to go?
Well, right now, my list has gotten a little smaller with wrestling specifically because I've kind of branched into other sports. I work with Ignite Wrestling based out of Vero Beach, Florida. They actually have an event on Saturday that I'm not even going to be at because I have another event, but I do commentary for them. So I should be doing all of the commentary for those matches, probably in post-production. We've done that a few times before. So I work with them. I work with the United States Wrestling Alliance, but they've had some venue issues, so we haven't done much. But they're affiliated with River City Wrestling Con, which is by far the biggest thing that I do. It's a convention, but I've been blessed to be the host. So I've gotten to, that's where I've gotten to work with Dream Names. That's in Jacksonville, Florida. And it's in June. So that's a couple months away, June 12th and 13th. So if you guys are thinking of going to anything like that, I mean, let me know. I can give you some information on it. But in Georgia, I work as well. I work for Atlanta Wrestling Entertainment, which unfortunately just stopped operating. But I loved working there. And I work for Viral Pro Wrestling, which I have an event coming up with them on February the 12th. And Viral is an incredible promotion, top-notch production, great fans. And even though I live in Florida, I like working in Georgia, I think, more. I just kind of like the audience a little better. I think people are spoiled in Florida.
I mean, Georgia is Southern wrestling.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it all started. I mean, really.
And it's fun because when you go to a match, you go to an event there, and it's probably like this for you guys in Kentucky and some of the other in the Carolinas, but you don't see a lot of people just boo, just on their phone and not paying attention. When you go to a match in Georgia, people are
the
whole crowd.
It's like that at WrestleCade. I mean, there are times that you can't take your mind off it. We saw Malachi Black and Buddy Matthews main event WrestleCade. And when we left, we were like, that's the greatest match we've ever seen. I mean, it was phenomenal. Yeah. And you were like the whole time, just like you were like, you could not take your eyes off of it. It was absolutely amazing.
Well, I'm sure a lot of that is just those two performers, right?
Oh, no doubt.
They're both incredible. But I would dare say that based on where you were and the kinds of people you were with, a good audience, a good energy in a room does a whole lot.
Well, I tell you, the next day we watched George South versus Colby Carino in a no holds barred hardcore match. And I mean, I was like, that's the dangest thing I've ever seen in my life. But it was it was like a car wreck. You couldn't take your eyes off of it.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was just like you said, at those indie events, the atmosphere is just so different. I like it when you see, the grandmothers that have been fans for 100 years,
decades.
I mean, and they're punching at the heels and they're booing them, and I mean, it's fantastic.
I've seen my fair share of nasty old grandmothers just getting in people's faces and yelling. I've had heels hide behind me, and I thought I was going to get hit by an old lady. It gets pretty dicey out there with some of those folks, and that's so different than the audiences at a WWE or an AEW event. And if you're a real fan, I recommend to anybody, go invest your time and energy and money into going and watching the independent shows, even the crummy ones, because there's, I've done some bad shows. We've all, you gotta learn but like some of those are the most fun because the fans are outrageous and the wrestlers are outrageous, and it's just such a good time. If you've got a love for this, you're going to have even more adoration because it really is a whole different energy than what you get on TV.
And, I'm sure you know this as well, being in that smaller promotion, the wrestlers recognize and start learning the fans that are there every time, right? And they'll feed off of it. Because we see that a lot with the AML promotion down there in North Carolina, is the fans and the wrestlers will come out and they'll get right up in the fans' faces because they know who they are. They see them every time that there's a show. And I think that's fantastic because you don't get that in WWE and AEW. It's more of a production type thing. That reminds me of the old days when Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett and then would come out and they would just get right up in the crowd's face because that was what got them going. And that's what I love about the independent wrestling, because you still see that today.
It's still there. And AML does a great job too. I follow those guys. I love Josh Gary. I've never met him, but he's a coach there. And he's just one of those few guys on Facebook and on social media that shares a lot of wisdom and coaching and tips and strategies that he's talking to wrestlers. I'm not a wrestler, but I take so much of what a guy like Josh Gary says. And as an educator, I can recognize a quality teacher when I see one. And he's genuine and smart and does a lot. So anybody that's over there learning from him, and I would imagine the same is true of the people around him, it's got to be quality for sure. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you've worked with a lot of big names throughout your travels. Who are some of those big names, and who might be your most favorite person that you've worked with?
Big names. Oh, my favorite and the big names are not necessarily one and the same. Some of my favorite guys are guys you've probably never heard of because they're people who I've really connected with both in front of and behind the curtain.
Right.
But I mentioned a few, and most of that has come through River City Wrestling Con. I mean, again, a guy who's only now, like tomorrow, 4 years in, to get to have the opportunity to be handed the ball, essentially, of like, hey, we've got thousands of people coming to see and hear this interview. Go ahead, pal. You got this, right? To sit down with Kane, that was probably the biggest one for me. Again, coming up as an Undertaker fan and watching in '97, that's the year Kane debuted. Like that whole tale of like the Undertaker's brother and then burning Paul Bearer and this, like that's what that kid was telling me on the playground.
Right.
And like I was like, I got to start checking this out. And now here I am sitting with him and talking to him and Mick Foley was there, and I saw the two of them win the tag team championships together in East Rutherford, New Jersey in '98 or whatever, 2 weeks after the King of the Ring when Mick Foley went flying off the top of the cage. And now I'm in a building working with these guys. We're all back here together.
Yeah, you're a kid again, right?
And, you don't wear it on the outside, but on the inside, absolutely. If you love this stuff and you find yourself there, you got to take a moment to just go, this is it. Like, this is cool. Well, this is incredible.
I got to meet Mick at WrestleCade. We didn't get to Kane. His line was ridiculous. So you had to make choices. And then we met Jerry the King Lawler. So childhood idol here, and then of course we met Jeff Jarrett, and Jeff Jarrett was the whole reason we're doing this podcast.
And it's amazing because most of these guys, you see these characters, Kane is the devil's favorite demon, and Mick Foley, Mankind, I've never seen a crazier character, but out of character, they're genuinely good dudes.
Genuinely good, really, and those two in particular, incredibly smart. Really just savvy in a lot of different areas. Yeah, I mean, it's a testament to their ability to perform, because they can live and embody these characters that people hold and are so endeared to, and still stay really grounded, really just good guys, just kind of everyday, very down to earth, grounded people when you talk to them in person.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's fantastic. And I was going to add to, I still think that the Kane Undertaker storyline is the greatest WWF storyline, WWE storyline that they ever wrote. I don't know that there's one better.
It's a good one.
So
I agree. And actually, that was one of the questions that I asked him in my interview, because they did that special a couple of years ago. You probably recall, the Brothers of Destruction.
yes.
But what that was it was just really like a face-to-face interview like this, and they kind of recap their career, and it's just a conversation with them, which is incredible to watch, fascinating. I love the piece. But I asked Kane, I said, why has the WWE never, ever, and correct me if I'm wrong, and Neil, if you're as good at this as you say you are, if you've got all this knowledge, you feel free to correct me here, but I don't think that they have ever taken all the promos and all the matches and all the segments that played out for that whole thing and ever packaged them and put them all together to kind of tell that entire story.
If they have, I've never seen it.
And I feel like there is money on the table right there, because I agree. I think that's the greatest story that's ever been told. And it's also like the most outrageous, but yet it's the one people really like the most. And they've never put it all together in one spot.
Yeah.
And I can't for the life of me figure out why someone has not thought to do that.
And they both give each other equal credit for what happened in their careers because of it. You know, we know Paul Bearer had a lot to do with it. Even Mick Foley had a ton to do with that whole storyline, because he came in right after that. But the whole, you know, Kane has said it many times that if it wasn't for the Undertaker, he wouldn't even have had a career.
Right.
And the Undertaker gives Kane that much credit too. Now, Kane won't take that credit, but
no,
the Undertaker definitely gives it.
Undertaker needed somebody at that point. I mean,
yeah.
You look at Undertaker's history. I mean, if you watch, I one of my first video cassettes I had when I got into it was that old Undertaker. He buries them alive. You might remember the blue, and it's the purple glove, and him rolling his eyes back on the front. The one that's on your shirt, that one.
Yes.
And he, but if you go to watch that, you watch the first couple of matches of when he debuts, and then every single match is the same match.
Yeah.
It's the same match. It's different guys, same match. Boom, flying clothesline, boom, this, that, goes back over the top rope, lands on his feet, walks around, rolls his eyes back, old school, choke slam, tombstone, 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
Same match. Then they were just feeding him big guys because they're like, it kind of made sense, I guess. You know, he's getting King Kong Bundy, he's getting Giant Gonzalez. They're just finding big goons to put with the Undertaker to find ways to make something impressive happen.
Yeah. But they just never had that story until Kane came along.
It started getting stagnant. I mean, Mick Foley was the first one that really kind of, I think, challenged him in a long time, where it felt like it was a really good story. And the great matches, really different, especially for Undertaker, because he's been having the same match for the last, 5 years at that point. And then you get Kane, and it's a whole other layer. I mean, I think those three guys together and the way that they kind of wove all of that, they're so integral to each other's story that it just made everything better around it, especially with anything dealing with those characters.
100%. 100%. So, I mean, so you're the kind of guy that we like to talk to. 100%. So, but I mean, that's why we wanted to do these interviews. I know we've kind of gotten off, and I knew we would, because we like to talk about wrestling too much, and you do too, right? But that's okay.
Of course.
That's okay.
That's what this is.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
it's good to have a format if we need it, if there's things we got to go back to. But you get a good conversation going and it's on topic like this, let it roll, man. We got time.
100%.
So one of the things there's a couple of these here that just probably doesn't really apply. But I'm curious. One of the things that we do is one of our shows is the Mount Rushmore of wrestling. Okay, we drop that on Wednesdays normally, and it started out with just all these different types of topics. We've done belts, we've done heels, we've faces, women, men,
tag teams,
all pay-per-views,
gimmick matches, yeah.
And then we came up with the idea that we did a top 50. And so the last 10 weeks of the year, we started at 50 and counted down. We did 5 each week. And we ended with the ultimate Mount Rushmore of wrestling. So we're curious, what's your Mount Rushmore of wrestling? Of wrestlers, I guess I'd say.
My list of those 4 guys is not necessarily a reflection of my favorites.
Okay.
Because I try to look at
neither
what
is
qualifies somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's who are the most important and influential. Like, to me, it's like guys who packed arenas, made money, who kept the product going, who really moved the needle when it needed to get moved. That's kind of how I look at it.
Exactly.
And so for me, and it's not I mean, a couple of my guys on my list are on like everybody's list. But I've got to go. I'm thinking like top money draws. I got to go Hogan, Austin. Where I struggle is another one in the Attitude Era. So I'll leave that off for a second. And then I'm going to go Cena. And I know that's like a weird pick for a lot of people because I don't know that anybody's going to pick Cena. But you think about how long Cena was on top and what he did for the company as they kind of transitioned into this more corporate machine, and what an amazing, incredible ambassador he is, and what a hero he is for kids, and the stuff he's done through Make-A-Wish. I think that guy belongs there because he was so important to wrestling, especially of the last 20 years. I'd say he's the most important wrestler of the last 20 years.
Right.
But the other one for me is, so who's 4, right? And I think I have to pick The Rock. Again, because Rock permeated and went into pop culture, and that in turn steers everybody back to wrestling. But my heart wants to put The Undertaker there too, because he's got a spot for me, obviously, and people know him. But I think if I'm being genuinely honest and holding to the same criteria, it's got to be Hogan, Austin, Rock, and Cena for me.
Nice.
Adam's really going to like this guy.
He is. Yep.
So our top 4 wound up being Cena at 4, Austin at 3. We had Flair at 2, and we had Hogan at number 1. So we almost up, but now like The Rock, The Undertaker, all those guys were interchangeable. When we did the top 50, we ultimately looked at the fact that Rock's longevity kind of cost him, right? But if you look at it based on the way you were talking about it, the money draw and all that, absolutely makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. So, and we had,
I think too, you mentioned The Rock now, and it directs people back to wrestling.
Right.
Yeah. No one doesn't know that that's what he did.
Right.
Even kids now, because like I teach kids and you do too. So like that's kind of Littman's. Like if you mention a name and they have no idea. Now, granted, that's not the bad, because some of these kids know nothing about nothing, which is very frustrating. But those are names, I think, the ones that I picked. And Flair's one of those guys that if you're a wrestling fan, everybody's all Flair. If you're not in wrestling at all, I know Flair has a little crossover. I don't think it's as much as wrestling fans believe that it is.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why
makes a lot of sense.
Me, he gets left out, but I get why anybody would put him in, and he deserves it, I think, as well.
Yeah. Well, and talking about The Rock, when he first left, I don't know maybe if it was a sour taste in his mouth or what, but he wanted to get away from wrestling. He wanted to show that he was Dwayne Johnson. And then I'm sure somebody got in his ear and he was like, but that's who made me who I am. So why am I running away from that? And I mean, now he's the biggest box office draw in Hollywood.
But you're a teacher too, so you probably get this. I mean, and I get it too. wearing your fandom out in public is not always necessarily smiled upon. Right. There is a stigma that goes with wrestling and what wrestling is and how their fans are and how people view it and how they treat it. And I think it's unfair. Then I also go to some indie shows and I go, well, I get why people question this, I suppose. But at the same time, like I love leading off and telling people like, yeah, I work in wrestling. I'm a huge wrestling fan, and people will inevitably like lean in and be like, it's fake, right? And I'm like, no, I have a master's degree, and what? What are you saying to me? It's fake? And I'm quick to just kind of re-educate people, like, it's entertainment. It's athletic entertainment, and as someone who's been in there, who's taken bumps in that ring. Okay, maybe things don't hurt as much as they make it look on TV, but they also hurt a lot more than you realize they do.
Well, I mean,
because it's metal and it's wood, and that's kind of it. And there's like this much padding, and you're a 200-something pound guy, and you're smashing that mat. There's still physics, and like it's a toll on your body. And the injury, I mean, I used to teach exercise science. When I was a college professor, I taught in the field of exercise science. So I used to use wrestling all the time, especially when it came to injury management, with strength and conditioning. Like, you think about what these guys have to do on the road, like to maintain that type of physique and that body, and to eat, you have to eat well, you have to work out. And then I get on the road, I do some of the miles like some of these guys do, and even that's not as close. How the hell do they have time to look and seem healthy? I mean, these guys are athletes, but wrestling, when people hear it, they have that visceral reaction where a lot of people, and they kind of look at it, look down upon it. And I'm sure with The Rock crossing into Hollywood, that was what everybody was afraid of. Hogan never really moved up in terms of his celebrity, out of wrestling. Like, he crossed over, but he was always Hulk Hogan in everything he did.
Right. I was going to say he was still Hulk Hogan and the five moves of doom, even in movies.
Correct. Right. Like, even when he wasn't, like, when he's in Suburban Commando, like, and he's an alien, that's still Hulkamania, brother. Like, you're not fooling anybody. But The Rock has gotten to kind of show some range and be different. And so I think he had to come back to it in his own time. I understand why he kind of walked away from it, because it's socially, there's a whole weird thing about wrestling. Like, it has mainstream appeal, but it also has a stigma that a lot of regular folks and all the just full blown UFC fans and American football fans that refuse to acknowledge it. They're not going to show it any love or respect right out of the gate.
Yeah, no, we understand that, because we have people look at us and go, "You do a wrestling podcast,
right?
Do people listen?" Well, yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be doing it just to be talking to each other. It's a lot of work just to be talking to each other. So we can talk to each other without recording it.
It's kind of interesting too, because a lot of the reason why I've gotten picked up to do a lot of the other things that I do in baseball and in football and basketball, and even in art, and people always are all very much like, we want you to bring some of that wrestling stuff that you do, because that's really cool, right? But I think part of that is because I'm the professor, right? Like, because that term is like, well, that's a smart guy. And so the fact that he does it, that's cool. If I was working at McDonald's, or I was just a bartender, and I told people I did wrestling, even though my life was identical in every other way, but my position was different, I genuinely feel like the kinds of conversations we have about it that I have with people would be entirely different. I think that the fact that I am an educated guy, right, supposedly, or at least I play one on TV, really kind of opens the door for people to feel like, hey, that's a cool thing. That's not beneath me. That's entertaining and that's fun. But if you're not, like, outside of whatever circle I guess I wind up in by default, I don't think those same conversations happen. And it's a strange thing that I've noticed that I don't know how many other people can relate to, but something I feel like I really have noticed over the years.
Right. For sure.
So I'm going to end with this question. Out of all the things you do, and you've talked about 100 of them, you do a little bit of everything. What does a young professor consider his most favorite side gig to do?
I love a good wrestling show, man, more than anything. There's the most drama in all the sports I work in is in wrestling. The least amount of money of all the sports I work in is in wrestling. But it's the first thing I ever really loved that was athletic, really of any kind. And when I get to be in front of an audience and be in the ring and be part of that show, it really is special. It's magical, especially, I've had so many like pinch me moments, and some of them were with guys that you've never heard of and you may never hear of again. But just, sometimes it's just to be there so they can make fun of me and like you just watch the crowd kind of react and move. Like you really are pulling the strings of people emotionally, and you look at, especially with like kids and families. Like I'm a dad, I've got 4 kids, and before I was doing it, I was bringing my kid because NXT used to do an independent, like their independent loop here. We used to go almost every weekend, and I saw the joy that it brought to my family, my children. So getting to do that and showcase it and make a good show of all the things I do, and it is hard to pick. I just love wrestling, man. I want to get back to doing a little bit more of it. It's a weird year for me. It was really great to go and catch up with a couple of guys over at the NWA Duval show. And I'm just so excited to jump back into a ring in a couple weeks. I've got something I'm putting together actually for a basketball game that's wrestling. Nice. And then in Georgia with Viral Pro Wrestling, because there's just nothing like it. And it's really hard to describe to people.
It 100% is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just something that if you're a true wrestling fan and you love wrestling, like it actually becomes a part of you. And most of our conversations, no matter what the topic starts with, at some point during the conversation, it always goes to wrestling. And it's just, we just love it. And to be able to talk to somebody who loves wrestling as much as we do, it's been such a treat to do this.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I don't think that we could have had a better first guest.
Oh, I don't either.
I really don't. I mean, the comfort level that you've had with us, you're just like one of us. I mean, you're a fan, and that's the cool part about it. And I really anticipate most of these guys that we're going to talk to, they're all fans at heart. I mean, they had to have been a fan in order to be. Nobody grows up, not a wrestling fan and goes, I just think I'll be a wrestler. All these guys are going to be super fans, and we get that part of it. But man, we really appreciate you coming on. I know it's your wife's birthday, and we're way longer than what we wanted to be, but you did say it would be your fault, so we'll just blame it on you. So.
It is. It always is.
But we really thank you for coming on and being a part of our first YouTube show. And we look forward to following you along in your journey on social media and stuff like that. And if you've got wrestling fans down there that lead them our way. We do fantasy booking, so it can't be wrong. We make it all up. So that's what's the fun part about it. So, but once again,
sure thing. And I, if you guys are looking for more guests, I know a lot of really great, talented guys and girls that I would be happy to connect you with.
Awesome.
That deserve their stories to be told, because none of us get to those next levels without kind of building a following and getting our story out to as many different audiences and corners of the world as we can. And the fact that you guys kind of provide that platform for us independent guys on all sides of the ring and the curtain is really, really fantastic. And I thank you for the platform and for the opportunity to chat with you and try out your new YouTube format.
Yeah, man. Well, like I said, young professor come on and is the very first From Corner to Corner YouTube interview. Man, we have loved this time together tonight, and we definitely look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Absolutely. I look forward to it as well, guys. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.